Really exciting to have Jordan here to kick off our first Love Your Lake for 2025. What a year. Say goodbye to 2024 and welcome in the new year here. We'll give a couple more minutes just for people that are joining, and thank you for muting yourselves, and just know that when the session starts, we will ask you to mute yourself. Keep yourself muted and turn off your video, but you're welcome to turn on your video if you so wish right now, just to say hi to friends. But we've got some more people joining. We've got one more minute before we can kick off our session. For those that are here, I want to remind you that February the 19th, I believe, yes, February the 19th, we have a seminar by Ed Poropat. Is that how you pronounce it? Does anybody know?
Poropat.
Oh, Poropat. There's an A there. So Poropat on February the 19th. So don't forget to register for that on our LKO website. I'm not too sure what his topic is. Wendy, do you know what the topic is?
Yeah, it's on our feathered friends and whether they're diminishing in numbers up here or if they're increasing in numbers.
Nice. Our feathered friends. Very interesting.
I don't think that's the topic or the title, but that's the one that I came up with off the top of my head right now.
Oh, perfect. Well, it is 7:30. So welcome everybody. Welcome everybody to our Love Your Lake session. And thank you for joining us for this 2025 season. My name is Kirsten. For those that have met me before, I'm volunteering. I'm no longer on the board, but I'm a volunteer for the LKO. Your board members are Dale. Dale, do you want to wave for us? There we go, Dale. Wendy, do you want to wave for us? There we go. Tanya, do you want to wave for us? Perfect. We've got Kathy, who's not here. Scott Sharman, do you want to wave for us? Perfect. Scott McPhee's not here. Marilyn is not here. Lance, I know, is here. I don't know if Lance, you wanted to show yourself. Oh, there he is. Good job, Lance. Wave away there. Terrific. Welcome. And then we also have Joel. I don't know if you're here today. I can't see that Joel is here. And then we've got Italo as our last board member. So we're happy to bring these seminars to you, as you know, to our LKO community. And there's talks are meant to be informative, to bring us all together as a community. It started out of COVID, but we're continuing them just because it's just a great way to learn during the winter months. And we learn how to protect our lovely lake and bring awareness to it and its surroundings. As a reminder, our guest speaker today is Jordan McDonald, and she will speak about, introduce the species and how to keep them out of our lake. Know that at the conclusion of her talk, there will be an opportunity to ask questions through the chat function like we've done before. So keeping ourselves all muted, and during her presentation, make sure that you keep your video off as well. Reminder that this is being recorded. So if you don't want to show yourself, feel free to just remove yourself, I guess, or your video, so you won't be showing yourself. But it is a reminder that it is being recorded so that we can share it on our YouTube channel that we have for those that are unable to make it here tonight. So let's get the things started. I think I'll introduce to you Tanya, who's going to do our land acknowledgement.
Thank you. As we gather here today, we respectfully acknowledge that we are situated on traditional territories of the Anishinaabe Mississauga lands and the traditional territories covered by the Williams Treaties. Kashik-Wigamog, an Anishinaabe name meaning a lake of long and winding waters, served for millennia as an important passageway and meeting area for our First Nation people. We are grateful for the opportunity to live here, and we thank all the generations of Indigenous people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years.
Thank you. Long and windy, right?
Long and winding.
Yeah, long and windy. We are long and windy. I want to introduce you to Scott Sharman on our board, and he's going to introduce to you our speaker tonight, Jordan. Over to you.
Awesome. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Our guest presenter tonight is Jordan McDonald. Jordan is an invasive species awareness project specialist with the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters. This organization was established in 1928 and is Canada's leading conservation organization. There are currently over 100,000 members. In 1992, the organization, in partnership with the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, established the Invading Species Awareness Program in order to address the increasing threats posed by invasive species in Ontario. Their objectives are to generate education and awareness of aquatic and terrestrial invasive species, address key pathways contributing to introductions and/or spread, and facilitate monitoring and early detection initiatives. Jordan is a current master's degree student at Trent University in the Bioenvironmental Monitoring and Assessment program and has a background in environmental science. Jordan joins us tonight to talk about aquatic invasive species specific to our lake. Please welcome Jordan.
Thank you, Scott. I hope everyone can hear me, and I'm going to share my screen to get started with the presentation here. So just bear with me one moment. Okay. All right, so if at any point you can't hear me or you can't see my screen, just let me know and I will try to fix it. Like Scott mentioned, I am Jordan McDonald, and I'm going to be giving you a presentation on behalf of our Invading Species Awareness Program at the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters. So, why won't it let me? There we go. Okay. So this is just a brief agenda of what I'm going to be talking about tonight. So I'm going to go over a bit of an introduction of myself, the Invading Species Awareness Program, and then I'm going to move into the profiles of the different invasive species that are either present in your area or are nearby to your area. I'm also going to go over the legislation regarding the Invasive Species Act. And then I'm going to talk about Clean, Drain, Dry and all of its protocols and requirements. And then finally, we'll have a question and answer period. So for myself, I'm a project specialist at the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, like Scott mentioned. I graduated from Trent University with a bachelor's degree in biology, and I'm currently doing my master's in to shorten it, we call it the BEMA program because the full name is a bit of a mouthful, and on salamanders and their use of habitat, both aquatic and terrestrial, on Pelee Island in Lake Erie. I used to work at ULink Center for Community-Based Research in the Haliburton area. So if that's why I look somewhat familiar to some of you, that is probably why. I did water quality sampling as well as benthic assessments on many different lakes in the Haliburton area. And I was also out on Lake Kashega-Wigamog when I worked with them. And then I started at the OFH as their water soldier monitoring technician. So I spend my summers on a boat on the Trent Severn Waterway, monitoring for the invasive plant known as water soldier, and then also helping to remove it and doing pretty much anything else they need me to do. eDNA sampling for invasive crayfish monitoring, garlic mustard pulling, education and awareness, pretty much anything they need me to do, I'll do it. So what is the Invading Species Awareness Program? So this program is a longstanding partnership between the OFAH and the MNR. It was founded in the early 90s with the goal to generate education and awareness for invasive species, because at this point invasive species were known, but it wasn't wildly known specifics about them, what can be done, what needs to be done, and all that kind of information. So we also facilitate monitoring and early detection and support surveillance, control, and response. So we do this on a case-by-case basis where possible. we are only a core staff of previously 4, now 7. So we can't be everywhere at once. So we rely really heavily on people such as yourself, members of the general public, to help us with early detection and surveillance to let us know when new invasive species pop up, because we can't be everywhere all at once. So some of these reporting tools that we use are the invading species hotline that we have. So as of last year, we had received 1,500 calls, and as of 2023, sorry, we received 1,500 calls, and as of 2024, we received for that 1 year a total of over 1,600 calls. So we get calls about anything from people simply just wanting to ask questions about invasive species, people looking to report sightings of invasive species, and people looking how to manage those invasive species. So we encourage all kinds of calls. We have people manning the phones from 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And we also have an answering machine as well. So if you happen to catch us at a really busy time or call after those hours, somebody will get back to you. And we also as well use EdMaps. So if you haven't heard of EdMaps, it's an online website that allows you to create posts of invasive species. So you upload information such as the species that you believe to have seen, photos of the species, the exact location that you found it in, and any comments that go along with it. And also allows us to interact with you kind of on a less intense timeline, because if you upload a sighting of a species but don't have photos, then we will reach out to you and request photos or any other additional information, and then you can respond to it kind of when you have time. Photos are really important for reporting invasive species, just because it's kind of the be all end all in being able to say for sure if you have found an invasive species or if it's just a native lookalike, because we don't want to raise the alarm when there's no cause for it, but we also don't want to say that you haven't found an invasive species, because without photos, we can't say for sure, and we don't want to say that there's no issues when in reality there is a sighting. Excuse me. We also use iNaturalist, which iNaturalist is an app or a website that you can use, and it allows you to make posts of any species that you see. So EdMaps is restricted to just invasive species, but iNaturalist allows you to post anything and everything. So we will go through iNaturalist, and any reports that are flagged as invasive species, we will manually look at those and then add them to EdMaps to build our distribution maps. Because what EdMaps allows us to do is it allows us to put all of the points of species that have been reported on a map that shows not only where they're found throughout the province, but also where they're found throughout the rest of Canada and the US. And it's free for anybody to use, and the maps are all public. So if you create a profile and go on, and for example, you're curious to see where you can find rusty crayfish, then you can just look up that species and it will show you where it is. We look at all of these reports manually. So if you make a report and you hear back from somebody, that's one of me or my 6 other coworkers who have manually gone into the report, looked at the photo, if there are photos, and made a decision based off of your information. So before I get into the invasive species profiles, I'm just going to go over a bit of the terminology that I'm going to use, because there's a bit of a dividing line between what's considered invasive and what's just considered non-native. So something that is considered non-native or introduced is a species that did not originate in the area, but it has no negative impacts on the environment. So this means it's become naturalized, and in some cases, it's even beneficial to the environment. So the example that I have here is a photo of rainbow trout. Rainbow trout are not native, but they are stocked, and they are extremely beneficial to anglers who wish to go out and enjoy the area. And they also don't compete directly with other species, and they don't impact the environment in any negative way. They just kind of are a good addition to the ecosystem. And this is the reason why there are certain species that we don't really target when it comes to invasive species work, because while they didn't originate here, they're not really doing any harm. Species that are considered invasive have a negative impact on the ecosystem, the economy, as well as public health. So these are species such as Phragmites, which will crowd out native species, reduces biodiversity, has impacts on economy, either by directly damaging systems such as waterways, or simply just the amount of money it takes to manage them. And they also have impacts on public health. So an example for that would be a species such as giant hogweed. Giant hogweed, you don't want to touch it. It gives you very, very bad rashes like poison ivy, but 10 times worse. So this is a species that it's very important to get it out if you see it, just because you don't want it hanging out where, you know, kids might walk by, and kids like to touch everything and touch this plant by accident. So we're gonna start with a bit of a primer on invasive species. Now, these are invasive carps. They are not a concern for your area. They're not really a concern for most of the province. They have not been established in the province. The issue with these is that all of the lakes that are shared between both Canada and the US, they're not considered prohibited in the States. So in the States, they will stock a lot of these carp species because they are good for aquaculture. They clean up a lot of the areas for aquaculture. And the stipulation, though, is that all of these carp, there are 4 species that are considered invasive. So bighead, silver, and black and grass. All the ones that are stocked must be sterilized. The only issue with that is the only way to be sure that the sterilization process is effective is to cut open the fish and check inside, which you can't do if the fish is alive. So we all are always being aware of if any fish are reported on the Canadian side of the Great Lakes, that people are there right away to respond rapidly to catch the fish and ensure that it is removed from the water body before it can establish. Because specifically silver carp are one that a lot of people know about. They are the ones that, if you've seen videos of carp launching themselves out of the water and knocking people off their boats, those are silver carp. They pose a lot of risks physically to people by, if you get punched in the face by a 50-pound or more fish, it's not going to feel very good. But then the other carps, including silver carp, they also will eat everything, and they do not stop eating. So they pose a big problem to native species because they remove all of the other food sources for native species, and that it creates a very off-balance ecosystem. So there have been electrical barriers that are established by the US Army Corps, that are monitored to make sure that these fish do not get into Ontario waters. But like with everything, it's not perfect. So every once in a while, we'll have 1 or 2 that kind of somehow make it past those borders. And that's why we just want to make sure that everybody is aware of these species. So, and one that we highlight is the grass carp. This is native to Eastern Asia, to southern Russia and northern Vietnam. They feed primarily on aquatic plants, and they can reach up to 100 pounds and over 6 feet in length. So for an angler, that's a pretty impressive catch. It's kind of something that people are excited to be able to fish, but from an ecosystem perspective, it's not something you want to get into the ecosystem, because they can consume nearly half their body weight in plants a day. So that's almost 50 pounds in plants every single day that these fish are eating. And half of the plant matter that they are ingesting, they don't actually digest. They're just eating for the sake of passing time. They're not doing it to actually feed themselves. They're just gluttons. They love food. And they can also produce 500,000 eggs during a breeding cycle. So if you have so much as 1 pregnant female, that enters a water body, it can potentially decimate the entire ecosystem. So just to reiterate, these are not an issue for your area. They're localized to the Great Lakes. But this is just an example of an invasive species that is high profile and the issues that can arise if it is allowed to kind of go unchecked. So I'm going to start with the round goby. So round gobies are found in Ontario. They particularly prefer water bodies that have rock or cobble substrate. They're bottom dwellers. They like to stay on the bottom of the water columns, and they're also not very big. They get to a maximum length of about 7 inches. They're native to Eastern Europe, and they have on their body a kind of gray and brown pattern. And one of the distinguishing features of the round goby is they have a black spot on their dorsal fin. So you can see it shown here on the fin up top. And that is a very good indicator because we do have a native species that looks very similar to goby called the sculpin. And sculpins will not have that black spot. And the other feature is that you can't really see it in this photo, but on the underside of the fish, so on the belly, the round goby has fins. It's technically 2 separate fins, but they're fused together and it looks like a suction cup. Whereas the sculpin, those fins are separate. So it's good to know the difference between the two, so you're not getting, alarmed by the presence of what it could potentially be a native species. But round goby are always ones to look out for because they feed very aggressively on fish eggs and fish fry. Pretty much if it'll fit in their mouth, they're going to eat it. So this does not bode well for native fish species because they just mow down on all of the eggs and fry that they can find, kind of like an all-you-can-eat buffet, and it doesn't give them a chance to replace the older fish in that population. So as you can see on this map here, they have not been spotted in your particular area. So your particular area is right now pretty free and clear of gobies. But as you can see, this is a more zoomed out version in the greater scheme of the province. They are pretty prominent in the Peterborough area, all around Lake Simcoe, and then kind of up and around. So they're not in your area, but they're not far. And one of the main vectors of spread that we found for goby is simply people who don't know that they're not supposed to have them, using them as bait fish. Because they're small, you can catch a bunch of them, and it's cheaper than going to the bait shop and purchasing bait fish. So we just want everyone to be aware of round goby. It's always good to be on the lookout. And if you find a fish and you think it's a goby, take a picture of it. Do not return that fish to the water body that you got it from, and either give us a call on the hotline or post it on EdMaps, and somebody will get in touch with you very quickly to let you know whether you have a goby or a sculpin. If you are confident that it is a goby, still put a post on EdMaps or call us to let us know. But the protocol is if you catch a goby, you must humanely euthanize the fish and then dispose of it a minimum of 30 meters away from a body of water where it cannot be accessed by other animals. So basically, if you catch one, you humanely euthanize it and then put it in a garbage that is a minimum of 30 meters away from the water body and let us know where you found it. Then you've done your due diligence and you've let us know, because EdMaps creates these maps just like this. And we want to make sure that we track where these invasive species are seen. So that way we can tell if they're spreading really quickly. We need to put some kind of program in place to deal with that. Or if they're kind of staying localized to an area, we just create these maps to give us an idea. So the next species is the rusty crayfish. Again, this is another bait species that we're pretty sure it was introduced to the province from anglers using them as bait. Excuse me, they're native to Ohio, so it's not that far from Ontario, especially for anglers that are crossing the border between the States and Canada. They're allowed to use them as bait in Ohio, but they're not allowed to use them as bait in Canada. But a lot of people either don't know the rules or they just don't really particularly care, which causes issues because that's how a lot of these species get introduced. So the characteristics of this species is they have a distinct rusty red spot on the side of their body. You can see it here on the side of the abdomen. If you can't see my cursor, I'm not sure if you can or not, but it's where this leg that's kind of folded over its body, that's where that patch is. They also have orange tips on their claws with these distinct black bands. So these are an aggressive competitor. They outcompete native species. They are just very, very good at taking up all the resources and displacing native crayfish species. So as you can see from this map here, red means that they are positive reports. Blue means that we got a report, but it was confirmed as another species. Because if you're not familiar with crayfish, it's really hard to tell them all apart. So as you can see here, there are a few reports. There's 3 in Halliburton, there's 2 on Lake Kashagawigama, and then there's some other reports all around. So this is indicative that they are present in the area, whether they're present only as a couple of individuals or whether they're present as kind of an established population. We're not 100% sure yet. So if you find a crayfish and you think it's a rusty crayfish, please take photos of it and let us know. So then that way we can continue to build these maps and move forward with different management efforts for these species. The next one is zebra mussels. I'm sure you've all heard plenty about zebra mussels. So I'm just going to go over them a bit briefly. They've been an issue for a really long time in the province. They're native to the Black Sea region, and it's believed that they were introduced to the province through the ballast water of ships. They have, as the name implies, distinct banding on their shells. You can't really see it on these ones in this photo just because they've been kind of coated in sand and mud and they're kind of getting bleached by the sun. But the main key feature with zebra mussels is the bottom is of their shell is flat. So if you set them down on a flat surface, they're just going to sit normally. And they have that striped banding pattern. And they're filter feeders. They remove nutrients and planktons from the water, which kind of has a bit of a bottom-up effect on the ecosystem because all of the food that the animals higher up in the food chain require on to eat has nothing to eat now that there's no plankton. And an issue with zebra mussels is what we're seeing now is there's another species of mussels called the quagga mussel, which is very similar. The difference being it doesn't have the same striped banding and the bottom of its shell is rounded. So it's not going to sit very well when you set it down. Quagga mussel do the exact same thing as zebra mussels. They're sharp if you step on them. They remove nutrients and plankton from the water. But the advantage that quagga has over zebra is quagga mussels can attach to anything, whereas zebra mussels can only attach themselves to solid surfaces. So zebra mussels attach to rocks, boats, the concrete side of locks. Quagga mussel, they can hang out in the sand. They aren't picky about where they go, so it's allowing them to move into areas that zebra mussels previously were unable to get into, and then to push zebra mussels out kind of from there. So this map shows the reports of zebra mussels. We've had numerous reports in your area. Most of them have turned out to not be zebra mussels, which is good. There's been a few that have been, but the majority of them have been native clam and mussel species, which is a good sign. And then this little photo here is a picture of quagga mussel and what you can expect. So with reporting mussels, it's always a good idea to get photos of it from all different angles, the top, the side, but to also have something in the photo for scale. So whether you have a measuring, like a ruler that you can put beside it, or simply something as simple as just putting your hand beside it in the photo will also really help in identification, just because with mussel species, there's a lot of size differences. Native ones tend to be really, really big, and zebra and quagga are more on the smaller side. But if it's the only thing in the photo and we have nothing to reference for size, a lot of the times it's hard to make a definitive answer of, is this really a zebra, a quagga mussel, or is this just a native clam and we just can't tell the size? So that's an important thing to remember if you are taking photos of these to make a report to us. So the next species is spiny water flea. This is an invasive crustacean, and they are very, very easily transmissible. The main reason they're so easily transmissible is because unless they have clumped on your boat or angling equipment, like shown in this photo here, you can't see them without a microscope. They're very, very tiny, and the only way that you can really see them is if they have clumped like shown here, or if they have grown in such high numbers that they create almost little like black clouds kind of in the water, then you can see them moving around. But if you only have a handful of them and they've stuck themselves to the side of your boat, you're not going to be able to see them very easily. They can result in over a 40% decline in native plankton, and they are considered the greatest threat to plankton on the Canadian Shield since acid rain. Excuse me, just because of their ability to proliferate and displace native plankton. There is a native species of water flea, which is sometimes mistaken for the spiny water flea. It's called Daphnia. The main differentiating characteristic between these two is, like the name implies, spiny water fleas have those long, sharp spines, and Daphnia does not. So if you see what you think is a water flea, take a photo of it. Ideally, if you can get them under a microscope or a magnification of some kind, that's the best way to be able to see these guys clearly. And if they have those spines, then you have a spiny water flea. And if they don't, then it's most likely the native species. The reason that the spiny water flea is able to kind of take over as quickly as it does is because no fish or any kind of species wants to eat this, because it's not enjoyable to eat something that's going to stab you in the mouth while you're trying to chew on it. So that's the main advantage that it has over the native species. And it is definitely one to keep an eye on to make sure that it's not getting in such large numbers. The issue with managing this is there are no clear management strategies as of yet for this species, just because it is a fairly new problem that nobody has had too much time to try to actively manage. And because they are so small, by the time typically you notice a lot of them, there are a lot in the area and it's very, very difficult to remove. So you can see from these reports here that we have had some positive reports, both on your lake as well as around the area. But we've also had reports as well where it was not confirmed. So this means that it either was the native species or it was something entirely different. Speaking from experience, we get tons of reports all the time, and they always come from people that have best intentions, but some people just don't know what the species is. So sometimes we get something listed as one species and it's actually something completely different. And there's no shame in posting something when you don't know what it is, because that's what we're here for, is to make identifications and to spread education and awareness about these species to members of the public. Ooh. So the next one is another hot topic species. This is the Eurasian water milfoil. So it's a submerged aquatic plant, and it is a very aggressive competitor with native species. The main method that this species gets spread around is through fragmentation. So this plant, any piece of this plant can reroot and regrow. So what typically tends to happen is people that are not aware of the plant will boat through it. Their prop chops up a bunch of the milfoil, and then it just floats away on the current until it is able to establish itself somewhere else and root somewhere else. So it, because it grows in these really thick mats, it kind of chokes out native vegetation by not allowing sunlight through for them to grow. And it can become incredibly widespread really easily. The best way to manage milfoil is to just prevent it from getting to your lake in the first place. It's not impossible to manage once it gets into a water body, but it is very costly and very time consuming. With the proper management techniques, it can be managed. It's just not something that's going to be gone in a year or two. It's something that is going to take probably a minimum of 5 years, if not a lot more, just depending on the extent of the infestation and the methods at hand. So the best way is, if there is a patch of milfoil, to mark it off in whatever way that you can, to make sure that nobody is going to kind of pass through it accidentally and spread it further than it already is. So you can see here from this map that there are confirmed reports of it. It's on Drag Lake, it's in the Haliburton, right in Haliburton, as well as some other lakes kind of south there. So it is a concern because it is close by. Unfortunately, there's no real method in place to prevent it from traveling through locks or dams, other than just ensuring that the due diligence is done, that people are not passing through those patches that connect to your lake and disturbing the plant. So it's definitely one of those species that the best way to manage it is to just stop it from getting into your water body. And this is by spreading awareness, as well as following clean, drain, dry practices, which I will get more into later on in the presentation. So next is water soldier. I don't have a map for water soldier. And the main reason for this, it is very isolated to specific areas within the province. So it is only found in the Trent Severn Waterway, as well as Bay of Quinte, Red Horse Lake in Kingston, and most recently was found this past summer on Lake Simcoe. So it's native to Europe and Northwest Asia. It's actually considered endangered in its native range, ironically enough, but it's doing very, very well as an invasive species in Ontario. It was first reported in 2008 in the Trent Severn, and the believed method of introduction is from water gardens. It was a very popular plant to put in your water garden. It requires next to no maintenance. You can just throw it in the pond and leave it to its own devices. It starts off as submergent under the water, and then as the summer progresses, the leaves will kind of fill with air, and it will float up until the leaves emerge above the surface, like shown here in the photo. It does not flower in the province. It just doesn't get warm enough and give it enough of a period to produce the flower, is the main reason. And it looks like an aloe vera plant when you see it in person. It's a very bright green, and its leaves have serrated edges that are actually sharp enough that they can cut you, which is part of the issue with this plant, because it grows in such thick, dense mats that not even fish will go through it, because they'll be sliced to ribbons if they try to swim through it. Makes it hard to remove because you don't want to grab it with your bare hands. And it can grow in depths of up to 15 feet. So this is just a good one to look out for, because with it being found recently in Lake Simcoe, it's more of a widespread issue than we thought. We originally thought it was just localized to the Trent Severn and then areas downstream from there. But now that it's been found in Simcoe, we're not really sure how it got there. We don't know if somebody maybe had it in their pond as an ornamental plant and then learned that they weren't supposed to have it anymore, because it is now considered a prohibited species. So it is illegal to buy, sell, lease, trade, or possess this plant. So somebody could have had it in their pond, realized they weren't supposed to have it, and got rid of it in Lake Simcoe. It could have been brought there by somebody who didn't properly clean their watercraft between going from the Trent Severn to Lake Simcoe. It's not really known how it got there, but it's there. And it is a plant similar to milfoil. all it takes is one plant and it creates little offsets. So if you have ever had a spider plant in your house, the spider plant will grow what looks like miniature versions, little babies off of it. That's what water soldier does. All it takes is one plant and it can grow all of these little babies. And because it's not rooted, it is rooted, but it's very lightly rooted, they just float away and they create a whole bunch of more plants. And they can create such thick mats that you'll have a pond, but it'll look like it's just a bunch of grass, like it's solid grass, because it gets that thick. So this is just definitely one to keep an eye on. And if you think you've seen it, take photos of it and let us know, because we want to make sure that this doesn't spread any farther than it already has. And then we've got Phragmites, which I'm sure everybody here has heard about Phragmites. It's considered Canada's worst invasive species. The Invasive Species Centre has recently created what is known as the Phrag Fund, where municipalities can apply to receive funding to try to manage this species. It can grow pretty much in any soils that are wet. So most commonly seen in wetlands, along roadways, in ditches. And it very, very aggressively chokes out native plant species. And one of the main ways that it does this is it actually alters the soil chemistry. Its roots produce a toxin that prevents other plants from growing. So it just kind of creates this area around it where even if there were other plants that could grow, they just won't be able to in the soil. And the stands are ridiculously tall. They pose a problem not only to biodiversity, but also to when they're on roadways. It's difficult because they'll be growing along the edges of roads and you're trying to make a turn and you can't really see because you've got all this frag blocking your view. And also in the fall, when they die back, they're just acres and acres of stands of dead, dry plants, which are extremely flammable. So, and it's an issue for those reasons. And it's also problematic to remove because the plants have rhizomes, so roots underneath the soil that can grow as far away from the stand as 60 meters. So even if you go and you cut down the plant and you remove all of the live plants, they're just going to grow right back if you haven't taken all those roots out. And you can see from this map here, frag is kind of everywhere. It is seen all along Highway 35 up through Minden. It's seen all in Haliburton. It's most likely in other areas as well. It just hasn't been documented. Like with all of these invasive species, just because it's not shown on the map doesn't necessarily mean it's not there. It just means that nobody has made a report. Frag is also hard to tell apart from the native species of common reed that we have. The main difference between them is the native reeds in their stands will have other plants in those stands. So it won't just be frag. It will be frag as well as a bunch of native grass species and flowers and a bunch of other plants. But typically without genetic testing, it's next to impossible to tell if you have native Phragmites or invasive Phragmites unless you have a stand that is so thick that it's very obvious. And then at that point, you have a much bigger problem on your hands. So this is a species that you can apply for funding from the Invasive Species Center to try to manage. And I know that some areas in Haliburton have already gone that route to map out the frag distribution and then make a plan for monitoring of that as well. So this is an inventory of the top invasive species that are shown in your area. So there are freshwater jellyfish. We got a lot of reports of freshwater jellyfish over the summer. The main reason I didn't include it as a species profile here is because as of right now, we aren't considering them a priority just because they don't pose a threat to humans. They will not sting you. They are very harmless. It is kind of freaky if you're swimming in the water and all of a sudden there's jellyfish everywhere. but you don't have to worry about them stinging you. They can't hurt you. And typically when they show up in an area, it's because the lake in question has been overfished, and they just come up as a result of a lack of fish and excess of nutrients. And then once the fish population is able to kind of reestablish itself, the jellyfish population will kind of go back down. Then we've got mystery snails. Mystery snails, I'm sure you've heard of them. We have our mystery snail program at the OFAH that allows you to get on our licensing to go out and collect them. And then we have the other species I mentioned already: spiny water flea, rusty crayfish, the Chinese mystery snail, which is included with the banded, zebra mussels, and then terrestrial species of purple loosestrife. So for the next section, I'm going to talk about the Invasive Species Act, which was established in 2015. So this was a document that was created in order to set out some clear-cut rules to prevent and control the spread of invasive species. This allowed species to be labeled as prohibited and restricted. So prohibited means you cannot have it whatsoever. You are not allowed to possess, buy, sell, lease, or trade this species. It does not mean, though, that if you have a prohibited species that you will be fined. If you are somebody who, like water soldier, if you have water soldier in your pond, there is no consequences to you if you call us to let us know that it is there. We actually have funds in place to help people with water soldier, as an example, in their private ponds, to get it removed for you, and we will cover the costs. Because the last thing we want is people who have a species that they were allowed to have before, now they found out they can't have it. The last thing we want is people worried they're going to get in trouble and then just dumping the species to protect themselves. There is no fines unless you are actively trying to sell it. That is when you will run the risk of being fined for that. Because if you are selling it, it's under the assumption that you know what you have. And if you know you're not supposed to have it, you know you're not supposed to sell it. So if you happen to have invasive plant like water soldier or an invasive crayfish, if you have a fish tank and you've got crayfish in your tank, you don't have to worry about getting in trouble if you let someone know you have that. You just have to take the proper steps to make sure that if you are looking to get rid of it, like water soldier, that you do so properly. And then restricted species basically means that it's a species that its use is restricted, so you shouldn't be buying, selling, leasing, or trading it. And you are also not allowed to bring it into a provincial park. So if you are found traveling with frag, like pieces of frag, for example, into a provincial park, then you could be fined for that. But a lot of what these rules are used for is they are mainly used to educate the public about species, because at the end of the day, if people don't know that they're not supposed to have something, you can't really fault them for that. So there have been some amendments since 2015. One of those major amendments is that watercraft and watercraft equipment are now listed as carriers of invasive species. So what this means is that if you are found to be transporting a watercraft, whether it be a boat, a kayak, a canoe, a paddleboard, and you have not taken reasonable measures to clean it, you can be fined up to $350. So the reason that it says reasonable is because everybody understands that situations don't always allow you to do a deep clean down of your boat. For example, if you're pulling your boat out at a marina, it might be so busy that you don't have time to sit there blocking the boat launch and hose the boat down. There also might not be facilities in place to allow you to hose the boat down. So that is why reasonable measures must be taken, because it's very simple to do a walk around your trailer quickly and just go, oh, there's a plant attached to the prop, I'm going to pull that off, get rid of it. Because if you are found, if you're pulled over by the MTO, a police officer, or conservation officer, and you have not taken reasonable measures to clean your watercraft, and you also have not removed the drain plug from your watercraft, you can be fined. There is a separate fine for the drain plug. So if you are found to be transporting your watercraft and the plug is in during transport, you can also be fined an additional $180 for that. So it's just best to make sure that you do your due diligence, clean the watercraft, and get that plug out so you don't incur any fines. There's also been changes to the act in regards to usage of bait. So in January of 2022, 4 bait management zones were established. Essentially what this means is you cannot purchase bait in one zone and then transport it to another zone. So this includes crayfish, salamanders, live fish, or leeches, as well as any dead bait fish or leeches. You can transport it in and out of a bait management zone if it is dead and has been preserved using a method that prevents decay. So this doesn't mean that you can just take a dead bait fish or a dead crayfish and throw it in a cooler. You have to have it preserved. So it's something as simple as covering it in salt in your cooler will make sure that you are not going to incur any fines if you are pulled over by a CO. And most COs are very understandable, particularly in areas where you're kind of on the edge of 2 different bait management zones. It's just best to know what your bait management zones are, keep the receipt of where you've purchased the bait. So that way, if you are approached by a CO, you can show them the receipt, which tells them that you bought it within the same zone that you are currently in. And then there's also some amendments as well regarding use of crayfish. There are some prohibited crayfish species that have just been found in the province as of this past year and a couple years prior. So if you have crayfish and you're transporting it outside of a bait management zone, it must be prepared for human consumption. So that means that you can't just be carrying around a bunch of dead crayfish. You have to have something done to them to prepare them for human consumption. So whether you boil them to get them ready to eat or you preserve them with salt. But the best method is to just be aware of your zones and keep the receipts that has all of the relevant information of where you got that bait from. So finally, we have the Clean, Drain, Dry. So this honors the Invasive Species Act. And in the Clean, Drain, Dry, a lot of the language says stuff like you should clean your boat before and after entering. You should remove any plant matter. The reason for this is, like I mentioned before, everybody understands that that's not always possible. In an ideal world, before you enter a water body and once you leave, you would hose down your boat entirely, get everything off of it, pull any sticks or plant matter off of it, and allow it to dry in the sun for 5 days minimum. But we understand that that's not always possible. A lot of people are going from lake to lake within the same day. And there's also circumstances that doesn't really allow for that. Like, for example, everyone at the OFAH is a hunter or a fisherman or knows somebody that is. And a lot of the times, like, for example, if you're going duck hunting and you're taking a boat, you might not be entering the water from an actual boat launch. You might just be throwing an old tin boat in the water and then dragging it out through the bush. So we understand that you can't always do this, but it is something that people need to be aware of. And when possible, you need to just do your best to clean your watercraft. If somebody is blatantly disregarding these rules, they're not removing the plug, you can see plants hanging all over it, and they're not even making an effort to remove it, you can report them to the MNR tips hotline. And then that will put the report to a conservation officer, which can then approach the person in question and incur a fine. So for Clean, Drain, Dry, the main method of doing so is ideally before and after leaving a water body, you hose it down. Some marinas will have boat washing stations set up that you can spray your boat down. but not a lot of them do. So this is just kind of on a case-by-case basis. In ideal world, you do it everywhere, but not always possible. You must drain the boat by pulling the transom plug, lowering the motor, and entering any live wells on board. And to dry or disinfect the boat, ideally leave it in direct sunlight for 5 days. Excuse me. If that is not possible, use a 1,000 psi pressure washer, or 1 to 50 bleach solution, or rinse with hot water of 60 degrees Celsius to disinfect. Or sometimes it's something as simple as just driving your boat from the lake you're on to your home, or from one lake to another. Driving it down the highway a lot of the times is a good enough method to just get the boat dry before it goes in another water body. But like I've said probably too much, it's all within reasonable measures of what you can or cannot do, because it's understood that all these steps are not always possible, but it is something that is enforced by conservation officers. So if there are unsafe practices that are being done, people are not doing their due diligence about clean, drain, drying your boat, you can alert conservation officers, and then they will be responsible for, giving out any fines where applicable. A lot of marinas already have the signs from the OFAH about clean, drain, dry. If you would like to get some more signs for other areas, all you have to do is reach out to us and we will send them to you free of charge. And just make sure that you just spread the word to everybody, because we want to make sure that all of these water bodies are able to be enjoyed not only by ourselves, but also by future generations, just to make sure that the lake that you grew up fishing on and have fond memories of, that your kids and your grandkids can also enjoy as well later on. So that is all I have for my presentation. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Yes, thank you so much. Here we go. There we go. We'll get you just to I'll get you to go. There we go. We have one question here. It says, can you remind us how to address the banded snails? There's incredible numbers seen the past 2 years, the north end of the lake, including how to dispose, and will they be around indefinitely? I know that a lot of people have done the licensing for it, and so they are able to do it. I think that's one of the most important things, that people have to sort of register to remove them. But go ahead, Jordan, explain that as you see fit.
Yeah, so technically, because the Department of Fisheries and Oceans recognizes snails as fish, that is why you have to be on the licensing to remove them. If you are not on the license and you are caught removing them, it's just kind of a lot of paperwork and headache that you just don't want, nobody wants to be involved in. So if you get on the license, most of the licensing that we do is through cottage associations. So cottage associations can contact us, get on the license, and then that kind of blanket encompasses most of the members. There are some different technicalities with that I would have to ask my supervisor, Rob McGowan, who heads that program, about. But when it comes to removing those species, if you're on the license and you are able to remove them, it's as simple as going into the water with a bucket and just picking up handfuls of them and tossing them in the bucket. You don't have to worry. They're not sharp. They aren't toxic. And they're fairly large and very easy to find. So when we organize mystery snail removal days, it's just a bunch of volunteers as well as staff from our organization going out, getting in the water, and just pulling snails out by hand. You can use some tools that kind of make it easier to get large groups of them. But the best way I've found is to just get in the water and use your hands and pull them out. And then disposing of them is it's best to dispose of them at a dump, just because with being aquatic species, they get very, very smelly. So you don't really want to put them in your own garbage. It's also not difficult to collect thousands of them in a couple of hours. So it typically a dump is the best way to get rid of them just because of the large numbers and the smell. And they're also a species that they're very easy to remove. So there is high hopes that with diligent monitoring and removal efforts that they can be eradicated from different water bodies. And like with a lot of species, they go through population booms and population sinks. So there'll be some years that are just really, really good years for them, and you'll see a huge explosion of them. And then there'll be other years where they're still there, but there's just not as many as before. So the main takeaway is to get on the licensing if you can, and then to organize some mystery snail removal days and get out and remove them. Because it's even a fun activity for kids to go out and just play in the water and pull a bunch of snails out and learn about invasive species.
Great, thank you. I think it's important to note, yeah, just a second, Lance. You can put your question in the chat if you'd like. If you have one, because I've got other people coming through this chat here. One thing is, Jordan, I was wanting to know or let everybody know that there are people on the LKO that are registered to do the actual removals. If you do want to become a licensed removal of the Chinese mystery snails or the banded snails, we can, I guess it's good to talk to your LKO member, LKO board member, and we can get you on that list to receive the information, and you just have to do the course that comes with it, and then learn all about it that way. While we're just continue talking, Lance, did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I did. Thank you. Thanks, Jordan. And thanks for incorporating a number of the questions that I sent you. But I guess I'm just getting back to the sort of criticality of, the wash and the transference amongst lakes and waterways. As you sort of laid out, we're very close to the Trent system and Lake Simcoe and so forth. So I guess, on the clean, drain, and dry, are there examples of, situations that have been more complete as far as getting, someone to check or do something? I mean, I raised the issue of a closed system, for example. You mentioned about washing at the site, but I guess the concern obviously is that it can't drain back into the lake. So, how is it that we can make it a little more critical? I understand education is the top priority, but, it's just the microscopic things that can be transferred through ballast and all the rest of them are just getting to a state where this has become very, very important. And how do we, are there examples, I guess, of other jurisdictions that you're aware of that have done something that's much more complete in checking and so forth?
So for that, in other areas, a lot of the times, mainly what it comes down to is just the capacity of conservation officers. Because in more southern areas, more populated areas, they just have higher numbers, so they're able to be out in more areas at once. Because when it comes down to the clean, drain, dry, it really only is the COs that are able to enforce it. And the main issue is like in the Kawartha Lakes area, there are 2 COs for the whole area. So they can't be everywhere at once. But one thing that can be done is if you are having an event on the lake, whether it be a fishing derby or you just know from past experience that certain weekends, like long weekends or something, are really, really popular, you can notify the COs and let them know of that. And then they may be able to post somebody at the marinas or boat launches just to help educate people about it and to also enforce clean, drain, dry if it's not being properly executed. And in terms of making sure that it doesn't run back into the water body, if you've pulled your boat out of the lake and you're cleaning it after that, it's not an issue if that water runs back into the lake, because the assumption is that everything that is on that boat just came out of that lake. So you don't have to worry about rinsing it off and that going back into that lake because the boat just came out of there. It's more a concern of if you don't rinse it off between going from, for example, Lake Kashagwigamog and then going to Simcoe, that you might bring something from Lake Cache to Simcoe, or the other, if you're going the other way around, you might bring something from Simcoe to Cache. So if you are just pulling your boat out of the water, you can rinse it off and you don't have to worry about it kind of running in from there.
Okay, good point. Thank you.
And I think it's important that somehow through the LKO that we will, I know someone said, thanks, Jordan. I've been working with Rob McGowan for a couple of years now, as I have too. Can you share Rob's information with the group to get on the license? And I think that we have that information. I think we can do that, or we can get that from Jordan and send that out to everybody as well, so that they can get on the list as well, because the more people that are licensed, the better it'll be for our lake.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. So we will, Marion and Chris, we will get that information out to people as we have in the past. So we'll continue to do that. Somebody else was asking, I traveled through the Western provinces last summer and was surprised to see the number of signs mandating that all watercraft had to be cleaned and the evidence of washing stations along the highways to do it too. So this person just, I guess, making a comment just about how there are more educational signs available for those that are transferring vehicles from one lake to another. So yeah, very good comment. Does anybody else have any other comments or thoughts or questions or concerns? I mean, Jordan, it was very comprehensive and very informative. It is sad to know, I know we have a ton of milfoil, and it's sad to know that it takes 5 years to get rid of it or more, a constant thing. But I guess it's a matter of just starting the process and learning about it and see what we can do to get rid of it. But it's there. It's in cache for sure.
Yeah, that's one of the main issues with invasive species, is if they weren't this good at keeping themselves in places, they wouldn't be considered invasive. And that's part of the problem with a lot of them, is like, it's not impossible to get rid of them. It's just, it takes a lot of money and it takes a lot of time. And if people are dedicated to removing it, it's definitely possible. It's just, you have to dedicate a lot of time and it has to be consistent. And in regards to the comment about the in the Western provinces, the Western provinces tend to have a lot better handle on things like this, just because they have such larger numbers of conservation officers, and it's also provincially enforced, the clean, drain, dry out there. So you will very commonly be pulled over and checked by conservation officers. There's a lot of areas, particularly in parks, where you can't get into a water body without going through some kind of checkpoint. So they've got a really good handle on it, and hopefully Ontario can kind of move in that same direction. If they can increase their conservation officer capacity, and then that will definitely help the spread of invasive species like milfoil.
Beautiful. People are welcome to turn on their videos just to say thank you. But if there are any more questions anybody has, just before we do say a big thank you, because I think, am I asking for, is Wendy or Dale going to do the thank you? I'm not too sure who. Wendy or Dale, I mean, because Kathy's not here.
I believe Scott was going to do it.
Oh, Scott Sherman, there we go. Scott Sherman, are you still there? But yeah, feel free to turn on your video. I guess Scott's not there. Well,
Yeah.
Well,
oh, he's coming up.
There he is.
There he is.
Yeah, my audio works, but I think my video is still disabled, but or you haven't turned it on, but
No, you can turn it on by yourself.
yeah,
Let me see. Where are you, Scott Sherman? I will ask to start video. Maybe you can do that now. Can you do that now? There we go.
yes. Well, obviously an extremely important topic, and we all know that we're here because of the water. And unfortunately, I think the people that certainly joined the Zoom tonight, which is appreciated, but it's like preaching to the choir. These people aren't the issue, but certainly through talking to neighbors and people that we see on the lake, we can hopefully educate and inform people. But again, Jordan, we really appreciate your time. I do know that you and your co-workers at OFA, and obviously the partners at ULinks are an amazing resource for us. We reach out all the time to you guys for questions and input, and you always respond immediately and give us a great help. So it's appreciated. And again, we appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate the invitation to come out and talk. And if you have any other meetings like this that you want someone to present at, or you would like somebody to come out over the summer and set up a booth at an event that you may be having, you can either reach out to me or you can reach out to our program email that's listed on our website. It's just info@invadingspecies.com. Because Jeff has unfortunately left us. He's moved back to his hometown and he's gotten a new job there. We don't have a clear person as of yet of who's taking over his role. But if you reach out to somebody, we'll get back to you and be able to schedule something else if that's what you would like.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
That sounds great. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Well, if there's no other questions, I guess that's where we'll end. We'll ask the board members and Jordan to stay on. But thank you so much for staying with us. Remember to register for February the 19th on the website, but on the LKO website for our next presentation. I think Ed Portopot, is that right? Portopot, right? Pot. There we go. Oops. But thank you everybody for joining. We'll look forward to seeing you to the next one. And yeah, let's look after that lake. Thank you, Jordan, for explaining things so well. Bye, everybody.